Well, hello everyone. Welcome to day 2 of RustConf, and it is wonderful to see so many of you here in Seattle and also so many of you online. I'm Nell Shamrell-Harrington. I'm a principal engineer at Microsoft. I'm also the lead editor of This Week in Rust. I chair the Rust Foundation Board of Directors, and I also co-chair the Memory Safety SIG in the OpenSSF. If you are interested in learning about any of these, please feel free to come up to me during the conference. My Rust journey started when I was working at Chef Software, specifically when Chef released the Habitat project. Habitat was a distributed systems automation project which was written in Rust. I wanted to work on this project, so not only did I learn to write Rust, I also became a part of the outstanding Rustacean community. From the beginning, I was so impressed with how dedicated Rustaceans are, helping each other learn and lifting each other up. I knew this was a community where I wanted to stay. After Chef, I went to Mozilla, where I joined the Rust team there. Because of my background in infrastructure, I first joined the infrastructure working group. My very first Rust RFC was for a Rust-Lang GitHub organization access policy. And I do want to make sure this was open for a few years. I want to make sure to thank Eric Hulk for finishing this RFC this year. Thank Eric Hulk. I also joined the async working group, where people like Nico and Yashua and Tyler Mandry mentored me through writing the async stream/iterator RFC. Both of these were great ways to get involved with the Rust project. But by far, my most meaningful work has been through This Week in Rust, also known as TWIR. I became lead editor in early 2020, right as the COVID-19 pandemic was hitting and online gathering and information sharing spaces became more vital than ever. Who here subscribes to This Week in Rust? Good, we got a lot of hands. Who here has contributed to This Week in Rust? Got a lot of hands as well. Seeing all of these hands highlight that This Week in Rust is not only one person's project. I am certainly not the only editor. There are currently 9 editors who work together to get This Week in Rust out the door every single week. I know some of you are here. Could you please stand up? Let's give them a round of applause. And This Week in Rust would not be anywhere without our incredible alumni editors, especially Barian, who was the founder of This Week in Rust. Let's give them and all of the alumni editors a round of applause. Even with our incredible current and alumni editors, This Week in Rust is not only the editor's project. Let's take a look at the GitHub repo. Over its lifetime, no lifetime annotation needed, there have been 1,177 contributors to This Week in Rust. Furthermore, there have been 15,755 commits to This Week in Rust. This shows that This Week in Rust is the community's project, which means This Week in Rust is your project. Give yourselves a round of applause. 4 years ago, I gave the first version of this talk at RustConf 2021. A lot has happened since then, and a lot has changed, both in the Rust project and in the Rust community. So when I started writing this updated version, I went to the Rust subreddit and posed this question. What does This Week in Rust mean to you? Well, this thread got a lot of responses, and it was very wholesome, especially for Reddit. I was amazed at how much this newsletter means to so many of us. We will take a look at some of these specific comments in a bit, but I noticed 4 overall themes among them. There are 4 common use cases for This Week in Rust. We use it to keep track of current project developments, as a historical record of the Rust project and community, as a source of professional Rust development, and what I call Rustacean connections. Let's start off with that first use case, tracking current project developments. The Rust project excels at conducting nearly all technical development in public. As Reddit user Kibwim put it, I credit a large portion of Rust's success to the transparency that it provides into the development process. This is one of the Rust project's greatest strengths. However, as the project has grown, it has become harder and harder to keep track of everything going on. My fellow editor, Logic, puts it this way. In 2016, there were between 60 and 80 pull requests per week. Nowadays, we have between 300 and 500. That is a lot of pull requests. Every week, Logic gathers and curates them into the updates from the Rust project section, keeping us all up to date with this rapidly evolving ecosystem. A big thank you to Logic for doing this. People also keep track of project developments through the RFCs section. Reddit user Matthew says, RFCs featuring in TWIR is generally the first I hear of them, get to read them, and get to decide whether I feel I have something worth adding to the debate. I generally don't, but hey. The RFCs section of TWIR is maintained by U007D, who was one of the MCs in the other room yesterday. In this section, you can see what RFCs have gotten approved. Reading through the comments on them is always interesting because RFCs almost always go through a lot of iteration before we finally reach that consensus. You can also see what RFCs are entering final comment period, keep track of the tracking issues and pull requests that go along with the RFCs, and more. The very heart of the Rust project is our RFCs process. And this section of This Week in Rust is the pulse point. A big thank you to U007D. While I'm here, I also want to give a shout out to the compiler team, who contribute the weekly Rust compiler performance triage. This provides a great behind-the-scenes glance at compiler development. Thank you, compiler team, for contributing this section each week, and also for all that you do. So far, I've covered how This Week in Rust helps project members and the broader community track developments. It's important to remember, however, that we are not the only audience for these developments. The other audience is people and organizations who are evaluating whether they want their organizations to switch to Rust. As Reddit user Cyanicus says, most importantly, it provided a pulse of viability, and programmers know that viability is not optional when it comes to adopting an ecosystem. Either it needs to be good or rapidly improving, and TWIR would often surface the rapidly improving part. The only way that others will be aware of, become interested in, and believe in Rust is if we talk about our work as it evolves. Which brings me to the next case for This Week in Rust. As a historical record of the Rust project and community. As Reddit user Chaos Entity, I love that name by the way, states, if I wanted to understand the history of how pretty much any other language or project or framework has developed over time, that would be a pretty sizable research project on its own. But for Rust, all you need is a few hours skimming through TWIR to get a decent understanding of where things were and where they are going now. Let's step back a moment, back in Rust history, to June 7, 2013, when Emberian published issue number 1 of This Week in Rust. There were 30 pull requests merged into Rust that week. If we skip ahead to last week, issue number 614, there were 553 pull requests merged into the project. Everyone, pause for a moment and just consider that, how much the project has grown and how rapidly it continues to grow. It's really remarkable. Stepping back again, have you ever wondered why our package repository is called crates.io and not cargo.io? Well, issue number 54, published June 20th, 2014, reveals the answer. When Tilde developed Cargo, cargo.io, the DNS name, or the domain name, was already taken by a startup. And that is the reason we pull crates from crates.io and not cargo.io. One of my favorite things to do is to take a feature I love about Rust, such as propagating errors using the question mark operator, and look back at the RFC where it was proposed. The trait-based exception handling RFC was proposed in 2014. This was during a brief publishing break for This Week in Rust, so it was first featured in the newsletter in 2016 in issue number 114. This was when it entered final comment period. If we take a closer look at that RFC, in the 16 months between when it was proposed and when it was merged, it received 600 plus comments. That is a ton of deep discussion and debate. If you ever want the full history of how the operator came to be, along with how the try block, which is still in Rust Nightly today, this RFC is the place to look. One of my favorite, more recent developments for Rust is Rust in the Linux kernel. That deserves a cheer. We're the first language other than C to do that. The first time this was mentioned was in This Week in Rust, was September 2020 in issue number 354. Linux Weekly News, or LWN, published an article about a discussion of the 2020 Linux Plumbers Conference. A few months after that, in issue number 386, published in April 2021, we saw the RFC for Rust support for the Linux kernel be submitted to the Linux kernel mailing list. If you haven't read this RFC or the many iterations that followed, I highly recommend it. It's a wonderful way to not only understand the overall vision for Rust in the Linux kernel, but also understand how, through the vigorous debates that the Linux kernel mailing list is known for, understand how it came into being and how it was eventually accepted. Later that same year, in December 2021, Rust in the kernel was mentioned in the quote of the week in This Week in Rust issue number 420. Yes, the Reddit comments were very interesting on that one. The quote says, B2 of the patch series to add support for Rust as a second language in the Linux kernel was posted to the Linux kernel mailing list. There have been several improvements to the overall Rust support since the RFC and B2 described in the linked mail. That following year, in July of 2022, things started to get really exciting. As YouTuber Brody Robertson covered in this video, at Open Source Summit 2022, Linus Torvalds mentioned that the Rust in the Linux kernel would likely be landing soon. And in October of 2022, it was finally merged into the kernel, as covered and celebrated by Josh Oss of ISRG in issue number 466 of This Week in Rust. Something I have always appreciated about our newsletter is that we don't just record that developments like this happened. We also serve as a record of people's reactions. One of my very favorite issues of This Week in Rust is issue number 377, published in February 2021. This recorded the establishment of the Rust Foundation. From the official announcement, to statements from the founding members, I wrote the one from Microsoft, to interviews with key individuals who brought the foundation into being, all of it is recorded here. It is so wonderful to have these on record. It's a record that grows as the Rust ecosystem's needs grow and change, and as the foundation itself grows and changes. No matter what comes our way as a community, it will continue to be covered in This Week in Rust. As Reddit user Wooster, I also love that name, puts it, I see the maintainers of the series as effective historians of Rust. Well, I am honored to be included in that group. And along with serving as a historical record, This Week in Rust also serves as a source of personal development in our Rust journeys. This is certainly what I mainly used TWIR for when I was first getting started. As Reddit user JSS79 states, as someone coming to Rust from a high-level language, the walkthroughs are great for gaining insight and understanding. This quote in particular highlights that although many of us do come from a C or C++ background, not all of us do. I personally came to Rust from a Ruby development background. The walkthroughs in This Week in Rust were essential for me to understand not just how to write code like a Rust programmer, but also how to think like a Rust programmer. Just last week, we featured an article also geared toward people coming from a higher level language, in this case, JavaScript. JavaScript is one of, if not the most used programming languages in the world. Articles like this, Rust for JavaScript engineers, are essential to continuing to grow the usage of Rust and the overall Rustacean community. The updates from the Rust community section of TWIR is maintained by Eric Sepinen, Extraverse, and Opio Lua. This section takes so much work every week. Thank you so much to these editors for gathering and curating all these links. Let's give them a round of applause. And along with articles and walkthroughs, this section also features project updates, such as this one from the Danube messaging project. This is a project I likely never would have heard of if it wasn't for This Week in Rust. Now, if I ever find myself needing a Rust-based distributed pub/sub messaging platform, or if I just want to understand how one works, I know where to go. As Reddit user Necrothitude Eve says, I love seeing the new projects being worked on. It helps build my own excitement to get out and hack on something myself. Another fantastic place to find cool projects is the Crate of the Week. Thank you again to Illogic for maintaining this section as well. I have heard so many stories of how helpful it is not only for our readers to see a cool crate each week, but also for the crate creators and maintainers to have their work featured. It's a great way to start to build a profile in the Rust community. And as it says in the newsletter, we all play a part in nominating crates for Crate of the Week and also voting for them. Please make sure to do that. When we are just getting started as a Rust developer, it can be hard to know where to start to get that real-world coding experience that we need in order to level up our skills. That's where the calls for participation section comes in. This is the section I currently maintain each week. Open source is one of the best ways to get hands-on experience in a language or an ecosystem. And there are a lot of maintainers that not only are looking for help with their projects, they're also willing to mentor and guide new contributors through their first contributions. Last week, we featured the project grepTimeDB. Working through open source issues, especially with a mentor, is, in my opinion, the absolute best way to take what we learn from those tutorials and walkthroughs and turn it into real-world code on our GitHub profiles, which greatly enhances our careers. It was an honor to read Reddit user Eric Dongubler's comments. TWIR, no exaggeration, boosted the trajectory I wanted for my career as a software developer into viability. For me personally, the best thing about becoming successful at anything is you gain the ability to lift others up. And this is something the Rust project does very well. Reddit user XX-1XX, that's another great Reddit username, says, Rust Standard Library was the first open source I ever contributed to. I was able to break into a software engineering career without a degree because of my Rust involvement. Our work on Rust, how we share and talk about that work, how we write and make videos about what we learn, how we mentor others through their first contributions, it has a real, tangible effect on people's lives. Which brings us to the fourth use case for This Week in Rust, Rustacean connections. Rust is used in so many different contexts now, and it can sometimes be hard to find other Rustaceans working in those areas, especially when it's a kind of a newer area of use for Rust. This is a place where This Week in Rust can help. As Reddit user gbin says, checking new libraries and developments is also really interesting as I am involved in the Rust for Robotics community. If any of you are interested in Rust for Robotics, do a search through the TWIR archives. There's a lot of really good stuff there. And one of my very favorite developments in the Rust community over the last few years is that This Week in Rust is no longer the only Rust newsletter. As uses and areas of Rust have become more specialized, these communities now have their own newsletters that we feature in TWIR. For example, this month in Rust OS Dev, which is focused on Rust operating system development. There is also the embedded Rustacean, focused on Rust in embedded systems, which is a huge area of Rust usage. And a few weeks ago, we featured issue number 1 of bioinformatics in Rust, which is a fascinating use case. If you're interested in it, definitely check that out. And there are so many more uses of Rust than This Week in Rust can possibly cover. And I'm so glad there are now additional newsletters covering these more specialized areas. And another section that particularly facilitates Rustacean connections is the events section. I saw this one last week, and I'm personally interested in this event where Carol Nichols, the co-author of the Rust book, and also one of my fellow Rust Foundation board members, will be presenting on building a career in Rust. This is a fantastic example of a Rustacean lifting others up. As Reddit user 7sins puts it, I imagine it brings a lot of info to those who see a local or online event as well, and gives them a chance to join or at least check it out. The events section of TWIR is maintained by Marion Golden, B. Dillo, Bianchi, and Kanapalani57. This section is a lot of work to put together every week. Thank you so much to every one of these editors. Please, everyone, give them a big round of applause. One of my other favorite sources of connection with anyone is through humor. As Reddit user Matthew says, I must admit I really like the quote of the week, especially its placement at the end. I get all the serious stuff first, and then I can get a good chuckle as I'm done reading TWIR. Last week's quote of the week is a great example of humor in our community. Quote, I clone everything now. The borrow checker permits this small rebellion, this inefficiency. It knows I suffer more, knowing my code is not idiomatic. Every clone is a confession of my failure. Every arc mutex a monument to my inadequacy. Thank you to Reddit user the Elden Lord for these profound thoughts. And thank you again to Illogic for bringing us so much joy from this section for so many years. As I come to the conclusion of this talk, remember, This Week in Rust is the community's project, which means This Week in Rust is your project. every single one of the current This Week in Rust editors started as a This Week in Rust reader. And I recently asked them, what does being a TWIR editor mean to you? What led you to volunteer? What keeps you here? I love this response from Bianchi. I believe being in the thick of the process and getting involved will help keep that Rust spark in me. And this is something I personally identify with a lot. There have been times I have been very down and very tired, and being involved in the Rust community has kept that spark alive. At the beginning of this talk, I mentioned that I used to work for Mozilla. Some of you might be wondering how I came to work at Microsoft now. Well, in late 2020, I, along with much of the Rust team at Mozilla, was laid off. Intellectually, I knew the layoff had nothing to do with whether I was good enough to keep. Knowing that emotionally, however, took a lot longer. I was stunned at the outpouring of support from our community. I remember receiving so many messages along the lines of, "You don't know me, but I want to let you know how much This Week in Rust means to me. I'm so sorry you're going through what you're going through. Please let us know how we can help." I cannot think of any other instance in my professional career where I felt so seen and I felt so supported, even by people I didn't know. We do a remarkable job in the Rust community at lifting each other up as technologists. But we do a stunning job at lifting each other up as people. My fellow editor, U007D, puts it like this: seeing so many amazing quality people who care not only about the tech, but also the people it could help, together it primed me to respond when I saw the call. Here's my call to each and every one of you in this room, and also every one of you watching at home. Please keep writing about Rust. Keep making videos, keep making podcasts, keep writing tutorials, keep contributing work, keep sharing your work, keep mentoring each other, keep lifting each other up. We as Rustaceans are leading the charge in not only writing software in a more secure way, as Rust is known for, but also a more human and empathetic way at the same time. I challenge each and every one of you to consider how you will answer this call in the weeks and months to come. And I will see you next issue. Thank you.